U.S. journalists. He looked at Heart of Texas, Being Patriotic, United Muslims of America, Blacktivists, Secure Borders, and LGBT United. Just looked at the content produced by those 6 groups, which were run by Russian agents. And again, this is a sample of the kind of material that those Russian groups were producing during the election. Turns out just those 6 groups produced material that was shared 340 million times in the lead up to the election. 340 million times. And that was just 6 of the groups that journalists have been able to identify. 6. Facebook alone admits to taking down 470 different accounts that it says were operated by Russian agents. If just 6 of those had more than 300 million shares, think about the reach that we're talking about if there were 500 of those groups operating at that level. The question is, why has it taken this long to get this information about what the Russians were doing in our election? Why are we only getting it from journalists who are having to piece it together themselves? Facebook page by Facebook page, Twitter account by Twitter account. These were American companies that were used as the scene of a fairly significant crime. What explains their lack of urgency to even figure this stuff out, let alone to make any kind of public disclosure that would help us see what Russia did? And now that Google is admitting this much of it too, it's not likely to change any of those dynamics. Joining us now is Elizabeth Dwoskin. She's a Silicon Valley correspondent for the Washington Post. She broke the story today on Google, admitting that Russian agents bought ads on Google platforms during the election. Ms. Dwoskin, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So let me ask if Google changes the game at all. I feel like I'm seeing the same pattern from Facebook, Twitter, and Google to admit this stuff belatedly, to not be doing particularly deep analyses of what actually happened, and to be playing it down.
Yeah, so first I have to correct you. Google actually didn't admit it. We found that out from our own sources, and they've actually declined to comment, and the comment they've given has been quite vague. So they haven't admitted it, actually. And, you know, the question of why have they been like this? Why have they had their heads in the sand? I think that we're only starting to chip away at kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we're seeing. One way of looking at it is that they knew well in advance. We knew that Facebook actually started first seeing signs of this back in June of 2016. So a while back, and then Obama himself warned Mark Zuckerberg to look into it. And the question is, were they just trying to wrap their heads around a new kind of attack that they had not seen before? Or is it that there's some incentive, there's little incentive that they have to really get to the bottom of what's going on? I think it's both, but look at these platforms. They're massive automated systems. And the fact of the matter is they can be easily exploited. And this, what we're seeing today with Russia, is really just the logical extension of massive exploitation in online advertising to begin with. And so this is the most nefarious version of it. But the truth is if they were really to get to the bottom of it, even though they have the impulse to do so, they'd probably see that they'd have to show the world how exploitable their platforms are. And that doesn't really serve them or their ad businesses.
If they did want to figure it out. I mean, I guess the reason that I've now started to care more and more that they do more of an investigation is that now that journalists have been able to piece it together and show some of the content, show some of what, you know, the product, what Americans actually saw, I feel like that helps me, just as an observer, as a news consumer, understand much more about how these things might have been effective. And then you can go one step further and start to talk about how far they reached and how many people they touched, how many people they may have influenced during the election. If they,
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, yeah, you really start to see that these were ads. I mean, hundreds of millions of people. It's got to be more than 210 million people Americans log into Facebook every month. So something shared hundreds of millions of times can have a massive effect, especially in a close election. You only need to influence a small number of people in a small number of undecided people actually to have an influence. And what they haven't really done as well is look at the connections between sites. So the group that you mentioned, Secured Borders, for example, or Blacktivists, they didn't just have a Facebook account. They had an Instagram account, they had a Twitter account, and if you clicked on Twitter, it would take you to a web page where you'd be tracked by tracking software. That tracking software could then be fed into Facebook, where you were receiving turbocharged targeted ads. So there's really a lot of connections between these platforms as well, and that is what we're just starting to uncover.
If these companies, Facebook in particular, were either had a change of heart, or got very brave about what they might find if they really look at this stuff, or if they were compelled by subpoena or search warrant to actually really find as many of these things out, as are findable out there. What's your level of confidence that they really could produce a lot of content, that they really could find most of what was done by Russia?
Oh my God, it's a great question. I don't think they can find everything. I think that genuinely people who work in security, these companies, are trying to wrap their heads around this. But I think that they can produce a lot more. We'll look at what they've done. Essentially, Facebook tied their ads to one Russian troll farm called the Internet Research Agency. 470 ads and only $100,000. That's nothing compared to these businesses. Google today, we have tens of thousands of dollars. But, think about how much the Trump campaign spent on Facebook. The Trump campaign spent $70 million on Facebook. So we know that if this was a massive influence campaign, a lot more was spent. And right now it seems like they're only looking at single sources. One question will be whether the intelligence community helps them, because a lot of what we've heard is that in previous situations where tech was involved in a national crisis, for example, during ISIS, the intelligence community was actually sharing information with the tech companies. That helped them get to the bottom of things more quickly. But we haven't seen that this time. And so they're also crying for help.
Elizabeth Droskin, Silicon Valley correspondent for the Washington Post.
Run it down to you, knuckleheads.
I'm getting increasingly obsessed with this story, and you have
more of a connection. You remember?
All right,
Russia, if you're listening, oh man, how come they can't put this together? Which I think they are. That's why it's taking a little while. Trump, your ass is going to jail. All your administration and your damn family.
Whether it be with customers.